as I was saying, Joy Taylor, every dog has its day. And since I'm a big dog, I've got 2 days. Okay. So now.
You just called yourself a dog?
Yeah, I'm a dog. Yeah, I'm a big dog, a big one.
Kevin Durant is 6'11", who can pull up from 40. Okay. This brother is on that level. I'm talking about offensively.
Do you think you're better than Darrelle Revis is right now?
I'm better than you.
Welcome back to another episode of the Low Down Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Mark Brown. As always, I got another special guest on the show. This guy's no ordinary guest. His name is Brandon Williams, and then he actually had some breaking news less than a week ago where he accepted his first job as a sports/news reporter, MMJ, for KPLC News in Louisiana. Just want to say big congrats to Brandon. I know he's worked his way up to this position, and he's finally about to follow his dreams. He starts within a month from now. So I just want to say, Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. So starting off, man, so how does it feel, before we get into it, how does it feel knowing that you're about to, make a big step into sports media or broadcast journalism really soon?
It feels great. It feels like a dream come true. Sometimes, it's not the easiest thing to land a job this early out of college, especially during the times that we are right now where everybody's having graduations virtually and stuff like that. I didn't think that it would come this fast, but I'm glad that, I was in the situation to be able to accept the position and apply for it. And it really just felt right to accept it because of the circumstances. When something just feels right, you just go for it and you do it. You try not to question it.
Exactly. And then think about it. You already got your foot in the door right there. Right then and there, you got your foot in the door. And then all you got to do is just take it one day at a time. And, a lot of big things can happen. Because I also noticed another thing for people that are in sports media right now, especially during this pandemic. I've noticed that with technology, the way people utilize it, it's a great way for people to network. Because once you eventually start with KPLC, you'll be able to, because I noticed for the station I'm at, I'm currently not in sports right now. That's what I'm aiming towards. But I noticed with the sports people at the station that I'm at, they'll share video with other stations within the area. And I noticed that that's a great way for people to connect. And then whenever football season is around, hopefully football, I don't want to, jinx anything. So hopefully football goes as planned. Because in Texas, they already had their plans out where the major schools like 6A and 5A they'll start a month later. So they won't start practicing until September instead of August. Whereas anybody that's 4A and below, they're starting on time. So I didn't really understand the logic behind that, but the UIL issued that statement, and they're going with it. So I don't know how it is in Louisiana, but I'm pretty sure they might have similar guidelines because I noticed most southern states have similar guidelines when it comes to stuff like that. So I'm pretty sure they might start late too, and whenever football season is around, you'll run into plenty of other sports reporters in the area. So that'll be a great way for you to network for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty much a waiting game right now. But I will say that it does look like we're going to be having ourselves a football season in terms of high school down in Southwest Louisiana. There are a lot of teams that have been still keeping up with their off-season regimens and stuff like that, making sure their players are in the best shape possible so that when the opportunity does come around to have a season that they're ready. Because the last thing they want to do is to be in a situation where everybody says, okay, or the commissioner says, okay, we can have football this year for the high school and some of the colleges down here. But then the players and coaches are like, oh man, we're not even ready and stuff like that. So it's good that they are still taking this time to get prepared. And it's also good that the news stations are staying ready just in case anything happens, especially when some breaking news hits for a conference that people are still waiting to hear a decision from, like the SWAC and from other high school teams and counties and leagues across the South. Because the South, it definitely takes football seriously like a religion, I will say. Just from hearing different stuff from different people and their opinions on the way football is viewed down there and the way that it's covered and the way people like to have it covered. It's definitely something that everybody down there takes seriously and something that I look forward to. What's life without a little bit of a challenge? And I think I'm gonna be ready for this one.
Oh, yeah, it sure sounds like it. And plus, like, you were right about that. I like that point that you brought up about in the South how football is treated like a religion. It really is because – and I noticed, too, early in the season, I'm pretty sure this is not going to happen this year, though. I'm not 100% sure if it will or not. But they would have teams play each other out of state. For example, they'll have a team from Florida play somebody from Mississippi, or they'll have a team from Oklahoma play somebody in Texas. So, I mean, I don't know if they're going to do that because of what's going on with the pandemic, but they did that for years. And I noticed that was a great way for – people within the media perspective could network in that possibility. So I noticed that's been going on for a long time. It's a tradition that they do, and then sometimes they'll air it on ESPN. Like, they'll air some of those games. For example, like not too long. Actually, this was a while back, but this is back in 2011 where there was a school in Oklahoma City. It was Douglas High School, and the sad thing is Douglas is not even a dominant school in football. In terms of football, they are not dominant in Oklahoma, and they played against DeSoto High School in Texas, who was dominant year in and year out. So they were playing one of the top 10 teams in 6A didn't exist then, so I'm going to say 5A. So they were playing one of the top 10 teams in 5A in Texas, in Dallas, at Cowboy Stadium, and these guys got beat 77-3. I mean, it was on live television. It was on Fox Sports Southwest, and it was pretty embarrassing for Douglas High School. I don't even know why they did it. They did it for money, obviously, but they just embarrassed themselves. It would have been more of a competition if a team like Jenks High School or Union High School in Tulsa or maybe Norman High School in Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City area where they're more dominant, it would have had, they would have brought better competition towards DeSoto. So, yet again, I highly doubt there will be any out-of-state games because there's already college teams that are talking about they're not going to be playing any, non-conference games due to the pandemic. So they're trying to keep everything mixed in between.
Definitely. I'm all for them keeping everything within the conference too. I mean, you still get to have some sense of football, but without having to run the risk of putting any other team or coach or player or parents at risk for that matter, especially depending on what state that you're in, because certain states, as we all know, have become the hotbeds for COVID-19. And it's the first priority for those states, in my opinion, should be figuring out a way or going back to the ways that they were doing to flatten the curve of the amount of cases that were being seen on a daily basis. We were heading in the right direction, but as of recently, we've taken a step back. And I think it would be a good business decision for student athletes to not put them at risk or their families at risk, because some people have come out and said that, just because a person is of a certain age or they're in a certain age bracket, that they're not so, they won't contract the virus so easily. And if they do, they'll be able to fight it off because they're young and everything like that, which, is a way to look at it. But in my opinion, you shouldn't even try to run that risk because of, again, the amount of ways the numbers have been spiking like crazy, especially in some states in the South and in some states out on the West Coast as well and up north.
Exactly, and it seems like states like Illinois are starting to spike back up again. I've noticed that they were keeping their numbers below 800 daily cases until now. I've noticed within the past week it increased back to 1,000+ new cases a day. So I don't know what's going on up there, but it seems like places like Chicago, especially like being one of the most populous cities in the nation, having that issue. And it seems like it's spreading around. But New York so far, it seems like they kept their numbers down. But like you said, most states down south, it's the opposite. And going off of that brings me to this topic right here. So if you look at some of the top headlines in sports right now this morning, I mean, it was early this morning. I mean, we're in Central Time. So in Central Time, it was around between 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Central, where the Major League Baseball was having a lot of noise going on with the Marlins and between the Marlins and the Orioles. So basically, there were at least seven. So basically what happened, Miami completed their series in Philly, and then 7 more players and 2 coaches with the Marlins tested positive for the coronavirus. And so that's an outbreak that happened within the clubhouse, and that brings the total to 13 from what I saw on ESPN. And so that situation just surfaced on the internet early this morning, and then it just brought a lot of doom and gloom to a bunch of baseball fans thinking that baseball was going to get canceled. But it looks like baseball's still going on. It's just those games got postponed for now. So just going off of that, this is another thing. they try to compare it to the NBA bubble, but that's really hard to do. Like, how can you potentially host a bubble within baseball players? Because baseball fields are a lot larger, much larger than basketball courts. Basketball courts can easily fit indoors. So it's really hard. That's another thing. Like, it'll be really difficult to have a bubble between the NFL, college football, MLS, MLB. Like, that's really difficult to do, to have a bubble. But it looks like hockey is on the verge of starting pretty soon because they had no players test positive, which is really good news. But it seems like I like to be optimistic, but it seems very difficult for outdoor sports to host a bubble like the NBA.
Yeah, man, and I agree. It is very hard to try to do all the sports in a bubble because the way that certain sports are played, it's very hard to put people in a bubble in a sense. I mean, one thing is with baseball as opposed to basketball, you have a lot more players involved when it's time to play the game and stuff like that, more positions. So it's easier to do it for basketball as opposed to baseball in that regard because you have a whole lot of other working parts moving around. You got like, while one player is on offense, essentially, the rest of the team on defense, they have a lot more players that are out on the field and stuff like that. And granted, the MLB has done a good job of keeping their fans at home, but still making them feel like they're still a part of the game in a sense with the cardboard cutouts and the digital way that they have been putting fans in stands and adding the ambient noise and everything like that. It definitely adds to the experience of the game if you're watching it on television. But there are still some people out there that love to watch the game of baseball in person because that's when you get to experience it at its purest. But especially with the news coming down earlier today about the Miami Marlins and some of their players and coaches contracting COVID-19, it definitely does give you some cause to pause and to really think about a different way to go about making sure that players are staying safe while trying to have some sort of a baseball season. You know what I mean? And if the MLB and the Players Association can't come to an agreement, then they might just have to cancel the season all over again because these players, at the end of the day, they're human beings. They have families. And the last thing they want to do, I'm sure, is to run the risk of bringing it home to their families, and then they end up getting infected and sick and stuff like that.
Exactly, because now, I mean, even prior to the season starting, there were players that were opting out, because they didn't want to put themselves at risk, like you said. And I'm hearing about NFL players also opting out before the season, before they even start camp. So that's another thing that I'm concerned about. My biggest concern right now is the outdoor sports besides baseball. Definitely college football and the NFL, because when you look at it, it's like you said, like the bubble is pretty much a near impossible strategy for something like that. Because football, there's like at least now there's like over a 50-man roster in the NFL. But like when you look at college football, they have a lot of people that are on the, the practice squad or, scout team. So they have roughly between 85 to 100 players on most Power 5 rosters, right? So when you look at that, it'll be really hard for them because football is a contact sport. We all know this. So when you look at it, the offensive line and the defensive line are at the most risk right now because they're constantly bumping heads and touching each other, pushing and shoving, making contact every play. So whenever you look at that, that's a huge risk. And, everybody's sweaty and everybody's near each other. And plus, there's locker room, interactions going on. So they might have to, come up with a plan where players can be separated. But also there is rapid testing. That's true. But whenever they're playing against other teams, that's when it gets a little tricky. And I'm pretty sure because, like, in Texas, they're talking about having 50% capacity for the University of Texas because their stadium fits at least 100,000 people. So if you put that at 50% capacity, that's 50,000 people still in the stands. And I know there's a mask mandate here in Texas, but there is a lot of individuals who are not following it. And, granted, you go into a football game, they're okay. Texas Memorial Stadium, probably said it wrong, but Memorial Stadium in Texas, it's outdoor. It's not a dome. And most college stadiums are not domes. So you're going to be outdoors. People are going to be close to each other. I mean, if it's 50,000, though, chances are the nosebleed sections won't even be occupied. So when you look at that, I don't know. Maybe I'm over my head with this, but it just still seems kind of tricky to have thousands of people gathered in one spot watching a football game. Because I think, in my opinion, it should be better off if they, copy what the MLB is doing with the cardboard boxes. They have cardboard fans out there, and well, the only problem with that is like people who already had season tickets or whatever like that, or season passes, they'll have to get a reimbursement somehow, and that'll be difficult for all these companies to reimburse millions of people who already bought tickets ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, it is a definite blow to the pocketbook in terms of that, and with the rapid testing and the access that they have to those resources, it is good to definitely do that on a daily basis, especially for players who are normally in close proximity with each other, because I don't know about you, but it is very hard to try to social distance in a dugout. Okay. That's probably the hot spot where you definitely don't want people to be so close together. So it's going to be hard in that regard for baseball players. But granted, if the curve starts to flatten among the Miami Marlins players, after they self-quarantine and stuff like that, and they are able to resume play, I have to think that, what if this happens to another team, and that particular team has tested and all their players and coaches came back with negative results, but then a few days later they test again and now they are positive for it. But the difference is that they were asymptomatic. I mean, they had no symptoms, but now they've caught it somehow, some way. And that's the biggest trick to all of this, because it's very unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. You could be totally fine, and we could be all the way done with the regular season and be getting ready to prepare for the playoffs, in a sense. But then we have to slow things back down again because of numbers going back up. So it's very hard to tell right now. And, I think that when it comes to football, I don't even think there's one college football team with a dome for its home stadium, except for maybe North Dakota. Except for maybe North Dakota State, I believe. Yeah, they might have one. But as opposed to them, I don't know any other one.
Well, there's another one I had in mind. Definitely Northern Arizona. Northern Arizona has a dome for sure, because I have a cousin that attended Northern Arizona. We went to a game a few years back, and they had a dome at the time. But those are the Western teams. Plus that's the FCS, and that's another thing. We already saw the SWAC, for example, one of the most recent conferences to cancel their entire season. So you're seeing these smaller schools that are not in the Power 5 level, definitely not D1 1A or FBS, that have already canceled. So it seems like, they're coming up with good plans. You had coaches you had coaches in the Big 12 actually that were extremely eager to begin summer workouts. We already heard about the Mike Gundy commotion, last month, where he was rocking that OAN shirt. That's a whole different story, but back in April, so this is in mid to late April, whenever America was still under a shutdown where things haven't reopened yet at that point, Mike Gundy was claiming that he wanted to start summer workouts early. He wanted the players to report in early May, and he wanted to get things rolling early because he wanted to be ahead of the other coaches in the Big 12, as in Lincoln Riley from OU or Gary Patterson at TCU, Tom Herman at Texas, all these other guys. He wanted to be ahead of them, but what happened was multiple players started testing positive for the virus, but that was actually around the time shortly after the George Floyd incident, and then during the protests, there were players like the starting linebacker for Oklahoma State tested positive, and then it was like a chain reaction, then a handful of others did. So we saw that, and then we saw players from other teams that also tested positive. But it seemed like out of that entire conference, Lincoln Riley was probably the most cautious because he didn't start his summer workouts with his program until after July 4th weekend. He waited. Now, other teams started around June. Most of them did. But Lincoln Riley was cautious. He didn't feel comfortable bringing his players back within the close proximity of one another. And it seemed like the plan worked, but he's also concerned. Many teams, like commissioners, like you said, they are concerned about when they start, 2-a-days, fall camp, whatever they call it, mainly fall camp. So they are concerned about that to make sure that everybody's healthy and ready to go and make sure that, whoever does test positive, like you said, it is tricky because if you're asymptomatic, who's going to know unless you got tested? So, and you got to track it. So whoever you were around, that's another thing. Tracking is really hard because people don't really pay attention to who they're around within the past. Like, say they go off a 14-day period, so that's really hard. That's really hard for you to pinpoint who you were exposed to during that time period because if you're not paying close attention, you wouldn't know.
Right. Exactly. And it's hard to keep track of the amount of players or people that you were in contact with, because that's not just something that you think about on a normal day-to-day basis. Like, okay, who was I hanging around with? Who was I the closest to today? Did anybody sneeze near me? Did anybody cough near me? Blah, 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 blah. It's a whole bunch of questions that you got to run through your head, and it becomes unnecessary in a sense. Now, as it pertains to college football, I would implore everybody to just take a second and to really think about why they're so pressed to have college football. Now, this coming from a person that definitely loves football and likes to watch it and wants to be able to have it for this upcoming season, but is the risk really worth it? And I get you want to have a competitive edge from your other competition in the conference and stuff like that. But, if you're doing that just for the sake of wanting to win, it's selfish, because some of these players have different immune systems from others. People are walking around every day with different things. So they may not be able to fight it off as well as some of their counterparts or some of their peers. So it's really hard to get a handle on it. And then on top of that, too, you still have to deal with college students trying to figure out if they're going to do distance learning or if they're going to be doing hybrid semesters this upcoming school year, where they go to school for maybe physically on the campus for like 2 days out the week, and then the rest of the time they're doing everything from home. Now, if you want to take that as an option, I would say that these schools will probably have to do a heavy amount of testing just to make sure that there's no spike in cases among the campus community, because the last thing that they want is to have, COVID-19 lawsuits coming up against the school because they failed to take the right precautions and to do the right amount of testing to make sure that the students and student athletes were prevented from contracting this virus. So again, we love to have our sports, but ask ourselves at the end of the day, is it worth it? Because we're putting a whole lot of people in jeopardy right now.
Exactly. Well said. And then, that also brings me to this. See, that's another difficulty, because that's a really good question to ask, especially for people that are listening, especially for all American citizens out there, because it seems like this country is so divided, man, politically, because, like, at first, when the pandemic first struck in March, whenever America went on lockdown, it seemed like everybody was on the same page. Like, people were avoiding one another. They were practicing social distancing. Well, they couldn't because they were on lockdown. You couldn't really go anywhere. Things were closed. But as time continued to pass, people were assuming that the curve started to flatten, in which it actually did in May. And then around June, that's when we saw a spike. And within this month alone, we experienced cases, like daily case counts, with record highs. Like, it seemed like a record was broken in hospitalizations and daily cases. And it seemed like it just continued to rise all over the country, mainly in the South. And that's when it really got out of hand, and people were trying to figure out how it started. Some people blamed it on protesting. Some people blamed it on reopening too early. Some state governors reopening too early. So I mean, there's so many different options on how it happened, and we don't really know the exact answer. And it just seems like with this country being divided, it'll be very difficult for people to come to an agreement. It'll also become very difficult for this virus to actually be contained, because you look at other countries out there, like you see other third world countries that have actually contained the virus for now, amidst the second wave, if there is a second wave or not. But, when you have individuals comparing it to the flu or comparing other deaths to COVID, which COVID is a brand new thing, we as a nation, we as a world, like the entire globe, is still doing research on how this virus mutates and how, they're actually undergoing phase 3 as we speak for vaccinations. So it's like, it'll be really difficult for our country, America, to really contain it. I believe we still can, but it's just going to take some time due to people being politically and racially divided. It just seems like it's going to we have a long road ahead of us in order to get everybody together and actually slow this thing down, because there's people who believe it's a hoax and there's others who are taking it serious.
And that's the thing, man. That's really the problem, is that we're not just fighting this pandemic, but we're also fighting another pandemic called racism, which is finally being addressed in a better way, where it benefits all people of color. And I'm definitely excited to see the changes that are happening right now because of it. But as you said, is definitely becoming a political thing when it really shouldn't be a political thing, because it really should be common sense. Like, if you want things to go back to the way they were, and if you want to get the economy running back open again, well, guess what? We saw what happened when, everybody, especially in certain states that were hotbeds, started to open back up after there was a little bit of a flat in the curve and stuff like that. Numbers went right back up, and they went right back up in record numbers. And yet some people are still out here saying that it's not real, it's fake news, it's a hoax, and they don't really believe it. They're just saying it's just like any old regular flu. Definitely not, because if you have a regular flu, you would have already had to have something in you in order for you to catch it. With coronavirus, this is something that you can catch just from talking with people, and if you don't have a face covering on, then you are not only making others susceptible to contracting the virus, but you're also putting them at risk too. So I think right now would definitely be a better time for us to pay more close attention to the people who are more prepared to deal with this sort of thing, who deal with diseases and viruses on a daily basis, who have been practicing medicine for X amount of years and who really have a good hold on how to handle these things. But at the end of the day, people are going to do what they want to do. They're always going to try to do what's best for themselves and not really what's in the best interest of the rest of the citizens here in America. And it's just sad that we're taking a total 5 steps back when we were already, when it looked like we were making some good strides moving forward. So what will it take to get us back on the right path? I say we probably going to have to go back to either having a stay-at-home order amongst all the states, unless you're an essential worker or something like that, or it may get back to a situation where we might have to put curfews back on, certain cities and certain states, just so that people will take it a little bit more seriously. And especially if governors from different states were to implement another curfew statewide, and if they made it a rule that if you were caught outside during the hours past the curfew and you're not a non-essential worker, then you would be fined X amount of dollars. Because one thing I noticed about people is that when it hurts their bottom line, they are more inclined to want to cooperate. So it may take that. Essentially in order for us to get things back to normalcy before COVID-19 hit.
Exactly. And that's another thing. See, my biggest fear about that is, like, I'm all for it, too. I'm all for, the country to shut down again, but it doesn't have to necessarily be for a whole month or 2 months like they did before, but it might be essential for them to do that again because, like you said, we are experiencing record numbers day in and day out in hospitalizations, and we're also averaging at least 1,000 deaths per day again. So the mortality rate has risen again because it actually did decrease back in May, between the months of May through June, but it seems like it's starting to, so everything's starting to spike again, not just cases, but like everything, like hospitalizations, deaths, everything. So that's the tough part, the tricky part. So if they were to shut down for another month or two, a lot of people would be willing to see that, but at the same time, like you said, like since people are so divided, you're gonna have radicals from both sides believing that there's no need for another shutdown. They want the economy to keep rolling, but more people are going to lose jobs if they shut down again. But it's probably for our own good because you don't want this virus to be floating around to the point where millions and millions of others are catching it, because there's like a theory saying that America could experience up to 100 million cases total. And there's roughly 330 million people who live in America. So that's not half, but it's close. It's getting there. And we wouldn't want that to happen. And plus, you're putting everybody at risk. There's not that many senior citizens out there. So if you were to have 100 million cases and say it's for the people who are immunocompromised or who are older, then we're through. That's that's terrible. And plus, like the CDC issued a statement earlier this week or this past weekend about, for people who are comparing the flu to the virus. Well, they estimated between 12,000 to 61,000 deaths a year since 2010 for the flu. And here we are with COVID-19, which really struck like at its toll. It really started to take a toll on America back in March. So from March to now, which is nearly 5 months, we already sitting at close to 150,000 deaths. So you can see that COVID-19 is actually worse than influenza.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the stats prove it.
Right.
And this virus, like, see, the difference between influenza is like we have vaccines for it. Obviously, there's a different strain every year, and the flu comes around during the season. It's like a seasonal thing, but we have more information about the flu. Whereas COVID-19, they're still trying to figure out how the virus really spreads, and there's been stories about it possibly spreading through the air or possibly spreading through the water. So I mean, there's so many different theories out there that these scientists and health officials are coming up with. So, I mean, another thing, huge shout out to every health official that's out there that's dealing with this, nurses in the hospitals. Like, they are the true heroes right now during this pandemic. So, with all respect to them, I mean, they're going through a rough time right now. And, states are experiencing record highs in hospitalization. So I'm just saying I agree with everything you said when it comes to, seeing another shutdown potentially, because I feel like that's the only way we can slow this down, because according to Dr. Anthony Fauci, we're still in the first wave. Like we haven't hit the second wave yet. So that's another thing we need to be concerned about.
Exactly, man. And we were heading towards the second wave of going to a second phase, essentially. But ever since the numbers went back up, everything that Dr. Fauci said that will most likely happen has come to fruition. So now we're back at phase one, trying to get a certain amount of days in a row where we don't see a spike in cases or coronavirus-related deaths. And in order for us to get to where we're trying to get to, which is essentially to a point where we can all go back outside and have the economy back up and running, but doing it in a way where we're still practicing some sort of social distancing methods, having mask mandates for every workplace, limiting the amount of social gatherings that you have where there's more than 10 people, and making sure that you're doing your part to stay clean, constantly washing and sanitizing your hands, and then also making sure that you don't cross-contaminate when you're out in public for those essential trips to the grocery store, because that's another way that people can contract coronavirus is through touching things that were cross-contaminated by somebody who knew that they had coronavirus, or somebody that was asymptomatic and didn't know that they had the coronavirus. So I think that it's definitely going to have to get to a point where, the mandates have to come down, and they have to be swift, and they have to be firm in the decisions to do so, because it doesn't make any sense to, one, try to rush everything to come back with all the numbers going back up at a rapid rate, and a scary rate at that. And then two, don't risk the lives of young children who you're trying to force to go back to school, because number one, we've all had been in grade school. Exactly. And we all know what it's like to be in kindergarten, first grade, basically elementary school age. We don't social distance for nothing. Right. Those kids at that age, they don't social distance. They thrive off of that human to human interaction, being close contact with their friends, because that's the way that the learning environment is set up for them to be in close proximity with one another, so that they can grow and develop into awesome young men and women. But, for people in our age group, granted, we may be able to fight things off if we're taking care of our immune systems and taking care of ourselves already. But still, we don't want to run the risk of sending our kids to school for those of us that are in our age bracket that have children. We don't necessarily want to run that risk, because if the kids catch it at school and they bring it back home, then that's going to start infecting a whole lot more people, and we're definitely going to start seeing a rapid number in cases coming back up again.
Yeah, exactly. That was a really good point, because that's the scary part. Like, we could see another surge from just schools reopening. Like, for example, you see some college campuses, some of them are having in-person classes, but they're probably not going to full capacity. But still, yet again, it is a risk. And, with elementary kids, that was also another point. So that's another thing. How are we going to provide advice to these kids because we weren't in elementary school or middle. This is long before COVID even was a thing. I mean, they did have coronavirus in 02, 03 around those years, but it was a different strain. This is a completely different ballgame what we're dealing with now. This is COVID-19 for a reason. So when it comes to that, and plus, like when it comes to wearing masks, no kids are going to wear. They're not going to want to wear a mask. It's going to be so uncomfortable for them. They're going to think it's a joke.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to think it's a joke.
Yeah.
So even high school kids, they're not going to wear masks. Because when you're in high school, there's a lot of hormones going on in your head, and plus you're not thinking straight because you're going through adolescence. So it's like you'll think it's silly to wear a mask. So people will look at you like a clown or something like that. So I'm just saying that just anybody from grades K through 12, it'll be very difficult for them to follow those guidelines. I agree 100% with that.
Yeah, man, definitely. And it's definitely going to take a lot of meetings, a lot of conversations that people may not want to have but need to have. And it's going to take a lot of coming together of the minds to come to some sort of resolution. And I think if we really want to see change, and I want everybody to hear me clear when I say this, if we really want to see change happen when it comes to flattening the curve and for things to get better systematically when it comes to the racial pandemic that we're dealing with right now, it has to start with us, ourselves, and it also has to happen at the voting booths as well, because November is coming up very, very soon. And I don't want anybody to get distracted as to what their goal and mission has to be right now. We need everybody who is able to vote. We need people to get out and register to vote, that have the ability to vote. We need people to pay attention to what's going on politically in their communities and in their state and in their local government, because all this stuff matters and all this stuff affects them in some way, shape, or form. They may think that it doesn't, but until they sit down and do some research on how politics is playing a role in the things that are happening in their life, then they won't really have a true understanding of how to deal with something like this. And plus, too, with everything that's going on with this administration and how they're going about doing certain things and the constant misinformation that's being told by them day in and day out, it is really scary, and it's doing a lot of people a disservice, and it's really causing a lot of stress and backlash on people who work in media like us, who are trying to go out here into the communities, tell the stories, give proper information, and keep everybody up to date with the facts that they can be trusted, that can be trusted, and not with just stuff that's opinion based and off of gut feelings and stuff like that. Because the last time I checked, a gut feeling isn't going to save my life or not.
Exactly.
The last time I checked.
Yeah, I mean, last time I checked, kind of like Nipsey Hussle, RIP to him, by the way. I mean, that was completely unsafe.
Yes.
I mean, but yeah, that's the thing, man. See, it's really hard to be. I mean, because like you also seem to be an upbeat person. I can just tell the way this episode is flowing. I can just tell that you're an upbeat person, and it's just really hard to be optimistic in times like this because, like you said, we need people to work together. I mean, November will be here in roughly 3 months, so you're right, it's coming. It'll be here sooner than we think, and it just seems like that's the problem. That's the problem. I just hope, and I also agree with the racism thing, that we're starting to see change. I just hope that this is a year that we'll never forget. Like, obviously, like 40 years, 50 years can pass, and we'll remember 2020 like it was nothing. So unless now, knock on wood, let's hope that let's hope that no other year becomes worse than that. I hope I didn't jinx nothing. Just knocked on wood in the background. But yeah, that's another thing. But and on that note, we can go ahead and end it now. Again, I just wanted to say thanks for coming on the podcast, Brandon. I wish the best of luck to you, man. Again, congrats for you landing that job. I mean, that's a prime example for people out there that are still looking for a job, especially in sports media. Brandon is a prime example. He worked his tail off to get to this point, and he's finally, God has blessed him with the position that he wants to do, so he can only just thrive from this point. And there's no doubt that he will accept that challenge and work his way up the ranks. So again, look out for this guy. Look out for Brandon Williams. His life is getting started with. It's a new chapter, and we all wish the best of luck for him.
Thank you so much for having me, man, and for everybody that wants to know they can follow me at. You can follow me on social media on Twitter and Instagram at BWill Media. That's BWILL Media.
Yep, you heard the man, so definitely give him a follow on every platform if possible. And again, thanks for coming on, Brandon.
Thank you, man.